I remember standing there on Mother's Day, surrounded by people who smiled politely but looked at me like I was a wasted seat at the table. The words didn't come all at once. They came slowly, disguised as jokes, as advice, as concern. Someone laughed and said I had so much potential, the kind of word people use when they mean you've done nothing with your life. Another person tilted their head and asked what I was doing these days, and when I answered honestly, the silence that followed was louder than any insult. In that moment, I realized something brutal. In their eyes, I had become unnecessary. That day wasn't dramatic on the surface. No shouting, no scene. Just soft humiliation, the most dangerous kind. The kind that seeps into your bones and stays there long after the room empties. I watched how conversations shifted when I spoke, how attention drifted away as if my presence lowered the value of the moment. I could feel myself shrinking, not because I agreed with them, but because I didn't yet know how to stand taller. What hurt the most wasn't what they said about me. It was what they implied. That I was stuck. That I had peaked too early. That my life had already shown its limits. They spoke as if time had made its decision about me, and the verdict was final. I nodded. I smiled. I played the role they had assigned me. But inside, something cracked. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was angry, but because I was clear. Clear in a way I had never been before. I saw my life exactly as it was, stripped of excuses, stripped of comfort. I saw the habits that kept me small. I saw the compromises I called being realistic. I saw how often I had waited for validation instead of building proof. And for the first time, I understood something simple and terrifying. No one was coming to save me from this version of myself. The next morning didn't feel like a rebirth. It felt quiet, ordinary. But that was the point. Real change doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with applause or motivation speeches. It comes with decisions that feel boring, repetitive, and lonely. I started with my time. I audited every hour like it was money, because in truth, it was more valuable than money. I cut conversations that led nowhere. I stopped explaining my plans. I stopped arguing with people who benefited from me staying the same. I built a routine that didn't care about my mood. Wake up early. Work when it was uncomfortable. Learn when it was frustrating. Stop when the work was done, not when I felt tired. There was no audience for this part of my life. No one to impress. Just me, my discipline, and the quiet pressure of knowing I had no excuse left. Days passed. Then a week. The outside world hadn't changed at all. The same people. The same opinions. The same assumptions. But internally, something was shifting. I was no longer reacting to disrespect. I was too busy constructing something that required my full attention. I stopped consuming narratives that made me feel temporarily better and started producing results that made me permanently stronger. By the second week, the work had compounded. Not in a flashy way, in a controlled, precise way. I had clarity about what I wanted my life to look like, not as a fantasy, but as a system. I stopped chasing admiration and started designing leverage. Skills that paid for themselves. Knowledge that couldn't be taken away. Networks built on value, not neediness. I moved differently. I spoke less. I listened more. I observed how power actually worked, not how people talked about it. What surprised me most was how quickly my standards changed. Things I once tolerated now felt unacceptable. Disorganization felt expensive. Disrespect felt irrelevant. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. I was too focused on becoming someone I would respect even if no one else ever noticed. And then, quietly, life began to respond. Opportunities didn't arrive as gifts. They arrived as tests. Conversations that required confidence without arrogance. Decisions that demanded patience instead of impulse. Situations where I could either show desperation or demonstrate control. Each time, I chose control. Not because it felt powerful, but because it felt aligned. The shift wasn't loud enough for social media. It wouldn't have impressed anyone looking for instant transformation. But it was real. My environment started reflecting my internal order. My work became sharper. My presence became calmer. People who once spoke over me now waited for me to finish. Not because I demanded respect, but because I no longer asked for permission to exist. Luxury didn't enter my life as an object. It entered as a feeling first. The luxury of choice. The luxury of silence. The luxury of walking away without explaining. Power didn't feel like dominance. It felt like stability. Like knowing that no matter how someone else treated me, my trajectory was no longer fragile. I thought back to that Mother's Day moment, not with resentment, but with precision. I understood now that humiliation had been the trigger, not the wound. The wound was my tolerance for a life that didn't challenge me. The comments hadn't created my transformation. They had revealed the urgency for it. 2 weeks didn't make me perfect. They didn't make me untouchable. But they changed my direction so completely that the old version of me would never catch up again. I had crossed a line internally, one that couldn't be uncrossed. I was no longer living to be understood. I was building something that would speak for itself. And the most ironic part was this. The same people who once saw me as pointless would never fully understand what happened in those 2 weeks. They would only see the results much later, when the distance between who I was and who I became was too large to ignore. They would sense the difference before they could explain it. The way I carried myself. The way I responded. The way I no longer needed the room to agree with me. That was just the beginning. I didn't announce my progress to anyone. Not because I was afraid of being judged, but because I had learned something important. Momentum dies when you invite too many eyes too early. So I kept going in silence. Every day sharpened me a little more. My thinking became cleaner. My decisions became faster. I stopped confusing movement with progress. Everything I did now had intention behind it. People assume power arrives suddenly, like a switch flipping. In reality, it creeps in quietly. It starts when you stop reacting emotionally to situations designed to provoke you. When criticism no longer feels personal because you're too busy building evidence. When praise doesn't inflate you because you know how temporary it is. I felt that shift happening inside me. I was no longer looking outward for confirmation. I was measuring myself against a private standard that only I could see. Work began to feel different. Not heavier, not easier, just more focused. I stopped multitasking and started finishing things. I stopped chasing 10 ideas and committed to one direction long enough to see results. That commitment changed everything. Results are attracted to consistency, not intensity. I learned that the hard way, by outgrowing my own impatience. There were moments when doubt tried to creep back in. Late nights when the room was quiet and the old questions resurfaced. What if this doesn't work? What if they were right about me? But doubt no longer scared me. I treated it like background noise. Something to acknowledge, not obey. The difference between who I was and who I was becoming was no longer hope. It was proof in progress. As my internal discipline solidified, my external life followed. Conversations changed tone. People started asking instead of advising, listening instead of correcting. I noticed how often confidence is mistaken for volume. I didn't need to speak louder. I just needed to be precise. When I spoke, it landed differently now. Not because my words had changed, but because my posture had. I wasn't seeking approval. I was sharing conclusions. Luxury entered my life in subtle ways. Not through excess, but through alignment. My environment became cleaner. My schedule became tighter. My standards became visible without being spoken. I understood that true luxury isn't about showing what you can afford. It's about never needing to explain your choices. I stopped justifying my pace, my priorities, my silence. Power revealed itself through restraint, through the ability to pause before responding, to walk away without proving a point, to let someone underestimate me and not rush to correct them. I realized how much energy I had wasted in the past trying to control perceptions. Now, I focused on controlling systems. And systems, once built correctly, don't require constant attention. There was a moment, subtle but unforgettable, when I realized the shift was complete. I was in a familiar setting, surrounded by familiar faces. The same ones who once spoke around me instead of to me. This time, the dynamic was different. They didn't know why. They just felt it. The space I occupied had weight now. Not because I demanded it, but because I carried myself as if my time mattered. I didn't feel victorious. I felt calm. Calm is dangerous. Calm is what happens when you no longer fear outcomes. When you trust your process enough to let results arrive on their own schedule. I had stopped chasing the image of success and started living inside its structure. Looking back, the transformation wasn't about revenge. It was about self-respect. About deciding that I would no longer accept a life that felt smaller than my capacity. The humiliation on that Mother's Day didn't break me. It exposed me. It showed me the gap between who I was and who I could be. And once you see that gap clearly, you can't unsee it. I learned that dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you enforce through behavior. Through consistency. Through the refusal to betray your own standards when no one is watching. That understanding changed how I moved through the world. I wasn't trying to impress rooms anymore. I was selecting which rooms deserved my presence. The irony is that the more selective I became, the more opportunities appeared. Not because I was chasing them, but because I was ready for them. Preparation has a way of attracting moments that look like luck from the outside. But inside, I knew exactly how much work stood behind every calm decision. I stopped talking about the future. I started living like it had already arrived. Not arrogantly, quietly. I invested in things that compounded over time. Skills. Relationships built on mutual respect. Habits that didn't collapse under pressure. I built a life that didn't need constant validation to survive. By the time anyone noticed the change, it was already irreversible. The distance between my old life and my current trajectory was too wide to cross back. I wasn't interested in explaining the journey. Those who understood didn't need an explanation. Those who didn't were no longer my audience. Power, I learned, is not loud. Luxury is not chaotic. And dignity does not beg to be recognized. It reveals itself through presence, through restraint, through the quiet certainty that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're building.